مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. للمرأة الأولى في تاريخنا تتولى منصب نائب رئيس أميركا سيدة هي كامالا هاريس. كما يقال هي بهذا على مرمى حجر من المكتب البيضاوي، وفي الوقت الراهن تعد من كبار قادة إدارة بايدن، وواحدة من أقرب مستشاري الرئيس، والمسؤولة رسميا عن مشكلة الهجرة الجماعية الحساسة على حدودنا الجنوبية. ماريلاند ولايتي كان لها 6 نواب حكام منذ أن أقرت دستورا جديدا قبل 50 عاما، وانتخبنا سيدة لذلك المنصب في 1995، وهي زعيمة مدنية رائدة نتحدر من أشهر عائلة في مضمار السياسة الأميركية، فهي ابنة عضو في مجلس الشيوخ ونائب عام، وابنة أخ رئيس وعضو مجلس شيوخ آخر، وهي أحد الأطراف الفاعلة الأساسية في مجموعة واسعة من القضايا السياسية والاجتماعية والثقافية في ولايتنا وفي بلادنا. في وقت يشهد تغيرات وتقلبات في أمريكا، شاهدنا فيه مثيري الشغب العنيفين وهم يهاجمون مبنى الكابيتول في نفس توقيت أسوأ أزمة صحية في التاريخ الحديث. تشتد الحاجة إلا صوتها، صوت الحكمة والعقل والتوازن أكثر من أي وقت مدى. هذا الأسبوع في برنامج داخل واشنطن يسرني أن أرحب بكاثلين كينيدي تاونسند. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm delighted today to welcome a major figure in my state's politics and on the national scene, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, former Lieutenant Governor. Thank you very much for joining us on Dakhel, Washington.
I'm so happy to be with you today.
So, we now have a vice president in the United States who is our first woman vice president. You were the first woman sort of vice governor, lieutenant governor of Maryland many years ago, back elected in 1995. How did it feel when you first saw Kamala Harris take the oath of office and become vice president?
I thought it was so exciting. It's, we've had a tough time having women leaders in the United States. We don't have that vision bred into our country's history. And so we have to create something new. And Kamala Harris is a great vision of a woman leader. And it was very, very exciting to see her on stage, beautiful as she was, competent as she was, and a terrific leader who comes at a time when we some people are afraid of immigrants, really an immigrant to the United States, which is, I think, another symbol of how exciting it is.
Can I ask you what is uniquely challenging about having been a female politician, successful female politician? I mean, there's challenges to being any politician, but what are the extra special?
I think the biggest challenge is that people don't think that you're competent in certain areas. For instance, women are known to be good with children, youth, and families, but are they supposed to be good with criminal justice, which is what I did, or are they supposed to be good on national security issues? So there are women women are usually classified as being good at one area and not at another area, and that I think is the biggest issue. For instance, when I was, as lieutenant governor, in charge of the state police, parole and probation, the Department of Corrections, and the Department of Juvenile Justice. And yet when I left office, having reduced crime in our highest crime areas by 33%, in what is When I left office, I was always asked to speak about volunteerism and service, what it's like to be a woman, and what it's like to be a Kennedy. Not once was I ever asked, how was I able to reduce crime in such a dramatic way? So what it taught me is the image of being a woman outshines real accomplishments because people see you in a certain way.
Wow, it's very interesting. Actually, my very next question on a list of questions that I prepared are precisely about the issues of crime and criminal justice. Yes. Because Maryland is a small state, but it has many of the same issues, and perhaps even more so than we've been seeing on the national stage with issues regarding police and race and guns and crime and how to reform, how to balance the rights of the accused and rights of law enforcement, all those issues. Now, they were on your agenda years ago. How do you address this set of issues?
Well, the way we addressed it is we wanted to reduce crime in a way that respected the community. And oftentimes it was thought that the best way to reduce crime was just to send a lot of police in. And what happened then is the crime would move from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. And that was not our goal. So we spent a year thinking about what is the best way to reduce crime. And we came up through a study, we came up with what is the best way. One, put community police officers in the community. That meant we trained community police to work with the community, listen to them, talk with them, get to know them. Two, we changed the role of parole and probation officers. You may not know this, but for instance, and I'm making these numbers up at the moment, but about 75% of crime is committed in 3% of the neighborhoods, and 80% of the crime is committed by people who are already in our parole and probation system. So we need to focus our efforts with the people and the places. So we retrained our parole and probation officers, increased their pay by 25%, took them out of the central offices and put them in the community so they could get to know the people on parole and probation, get to know their families, help them get jobs. We made sure that in the community, we only put them in communities that had children because there were people who wanted to make sure their communities were better for their kids. And we made sure that there was a community leadership group, a community organization that could work with the police and parole and probation officers. And we also changed the traffic patterns and the lighting patterns. So we would only have one-way streets and we would have good lighting, which prevented speeding and getting away easily.
Simple things like making sure.
Really simple things. But do you hear what I said? We made sure that the people from the police and parole and probation listened to the community, and there was a group in the community that they could work with. So we had to build trust in both sides, because you often hear of a crime being committed, 25 people saw the crime and nobody wants to tell because they don't want to get in trouble with the gang that actually saw what happened. And if people trust one another, you can reduce crime. And we set a goal to reduce crime 33% in those high crime areas in 3 years. And we succeeded. Mm-hmm. Very seldom do you hear about somebody actually trying to reduce crime, setting that goal and succeeding. We did that in 33. We did that in 33 neighborhoods in the state of Maryland. And because it was so successful, we doubled it in the next 3 years. And then we added after-school programs, drug treatment programs, and job training programs. But that was the second stage, which helped again. And that's so my belief is if you're going to have better community policing relationships, you have to work with the police. The community has to trust the police have to trust the community and build those kind of relationships. And to tell you the truth, that's why when people say defund the police, that's the last thing you want to do. You need to fund the police train them, train working together. I'll give you two other examples that need to be done. Because I'm chair of the Innovation in Government Awards at the Kennedy School at Harvard, we gave an award I think, was it 2 years ago? I think it was to a Midwestern city. I can't remember the name of the city. But they had a program that made sure that mental health workers rode along with police officers so that when there was a problem, the mental health worker, the therapist, would help the police officer calm down the situation. And originally, the police were very suspicious of, why do I have another person in the car with me who's not a police officer? But over the period of a couple of years, it helped them so much. Mm-hmm. And I have to tell you, I thought we should have done that when I was lieutenant governor, because a number of police officers were killed. I mean, I went to so many funerals of police officers who were killed by crazy people taking drugs, people who committed suicide. And it would have helped to help those who are trained, who had mental health training.
Let me ask you, you're describing what seems to be a whole series of very important local, community-oriented solutions to these problems. And yet at the same time, we have big national debates about these problems. And, Washington legislators debate different pieces of legislation about them. So how do you divide which pieces of this are right for Washington to address and which pieces can only be addressed at the local level?
Well, the truth is, a lot of the federal government, the Department of Justice, provides the money that we used in the state of Maryland to do this training and redirect how money was used. So that was the time when there were surpluses, both at the state level and at the federal level. And the issue is, you don't need oftentimes laws, you need an attitude change.
We're going to come back after the break, and we're going to discuss some other issues on the public policy agenda on which you've spoken out about. We'll get to them in just a moment.
We all know it. Politicians are at the bottom of the list of people we consider honest, truthful, and trustworthy. They shade the truth to get elected and keep it at arm's length to get reelected. Of course, there are many honest, truthful, and trustworthy women and men in public life, but they tend to be overshadowed by those for whom truth is elastic. As one famous saying goes, instead of giving politicians the keys to the city, it might be better just to change the locks. So to whom do we turn to know if a politician is playing truth or consequences? I turn to Fact Checker, a special feature of the Washington Post that is now a decade old. Under editor and chief writer Glenn Kessler, Fact Checker looks at what it calls the truth behind rhetoric to judge whether a politician's words are accurate, and if not, how far off they are, awarding up to 4 Pinocchios for huge misstatements. A real whopper. So if you're wondering whether the infrastructure bill will really create 19 million jobs, as President Biden has promised, that earned 2 Pinocchios, or whether any of President Trump's claims about really winning Pennsylvania, Georgia, or Arizona held a shred of truth, that claimed 4 Pinocchios. Check out the Fact Checker.
Again, our guest today is Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, attorney, politician, author, civic activist. She was twice elected lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland and remains a major voice on the critical issues affecting our state and our country. She is currently the chair of American Bridge, a nonprofit organization that raises funds for Democratic candidates and causes. She is, of course, the daughter of former Senator and Attorney General Robert Kennedy and the niece of President John F. Kennedy. Let me ask you about another big issue on which you've spoken out recently, and that's the question of political violence. This is an issue on which, tragically, you have, regrettably, special personal knowledge. You and one of your cousins spoke out after the January 6th riots on Capitol Hill with an op-ed in the Washington Post. Why did you do that?
I think it was very important that we said, this is unacceptable, what happened during that attack on Capitol Hill. It was unacceptable as a matter of democracy, and it's unacceptable to resolve our problems here in the United States by political violence. One of the great parts of America is our belief in the democratic system, to accept the results of an election. And clearly that was not going on. We thought that because both of us had experienced violence in our own family, that we had a unique voice in which to speak about it, and hope that people could listen. As you can see, that has not always happened. And just today, just a few days, in the last few weeks, a number of the Capitol police officers have spoken out about the fear that they felt on that day, on January 6th, about how they were attacked viciously and how the Republican Party has not actually said forthrightly how terrible that was. They're afraid. And that fear, I think, is very unfortunate for our country.
I mean, so far, Congress has not acted, and there may end up not being a national commission to even look at what happened on January 6th and how to prevent its recurrence. I think it's fair to say not quite a profile in courage.
Right. Well, I feel it's very unfortunate, and it's sad, and it's a sad state of affairs. I have to, on the other hand, give Joe Biden high marks for trying to change the tone in our country, to respect those with whom he disagrees, to not call names, to not say anybody is stupid. And I think that to the extent that we can all learn from that kind of rhetoric, we'll do better, because it's very important that we all learn to be with one another. When I was growing up, my uncle John Kennedy had run against Senator Lodge, and it was a tough battle in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And obviously, I'm telling you the story because my uncle won. But every weekend, I remember I was living in Georgetown at that time, my family and his family would play touch football on Saturday, and there was a Kennedy Lodge trophy. And some weekends they would win, and some weekends we would win. And there we could still play touch football, even though politically we were fighting. And just the other night, I had dinner with Senator Loomis from Wyoming, who is a Republican. And we could laugh about so many things and understand that, of course, we're not going to agree about everything, but it's important to understand where we can agree and where we can share. So I think it's to the extent that President Biden is trying to build those kind of bridges, I congratulate him, and I try to say, of course, politically we may disagree, but let's figure out how we can reach across the aisle. I think my uncle Ted Kennedy was known among his Republican colleagues for reaching out, for finding ways that you can share something, and that's a much better way to live.
Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, I'm afraid we've run out of time, although I have another hour's worth of questions that we could discuss. I hope we can have you back on the show. Thank you very much for joining us on Dakhil, Washington.
It's been a total pleasure. Thank you.
There's a famous saying in America, never discuss religion and politics in polite company. You can talk about the weather, talk about sports, even talk about family, but these two issues are bound to incite such passion that chances of friendly conversation dissolves into verbal fireworks are regrettably high. Combine the two, talk about religion and politics, and you're in for a real show. I think that's too bad, because religion, mined appropriately, can play an enormously useful role in politics. It is a source of wisdom, ethics, morality, and great insight into the human condition. Every frailty, every emotion, every attribute, laudable, embarrassing, and sinister, is found in the sacred tradition of the vast array of religious beliefs that provide meaning, solace, and motivation for millions of Americans. Of course, religion can also be a curse when it comes to public life. There was a time when religious tests were common, whether official or not. The founders of our country were Protestants, and anyone who wasn't was suspect, at best. Discrimination against people of other religions was a sad but consistent feature of American history. It took 180 years to elect our first Catholic as president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. We just elected our second, Joe Biden. We've never elected a person of another faith, whether Jewish or Muslim, Hindu, or no faith at all. George Washington, who was a much wiser leader than many give him credit for, understood all this. He is best known for two historic achievements: leading a ragtag band of rebels to victory over the British Empire, and then serving 2 terms as president and retiring, becoming perhaps the first leader in world history ever to leave office voluntarily. But among his other great achievements was to give meaning to America's promise of religious liberty, a cornerstone of the First Amendment to the American Constitution. In the year 1790, Washington wrote a letter to the Jewish community of Newport, Rhode Island, where the oldest synagogue in America was located, offering words that set the standard for American presidents even to this day. In the purest example of religious tolerance in our nation's history, Washington wrote, quote, "For happily the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, and requires only that those who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens, and giving it on all occasion their effectual support." And so, on this day, as I host the niece of our first Catholic president, just 100 days or so after the inauguration of our second Catholic president, I say thank you to George Washington for setting a standard of inclusion whose goals we aspire to reach even today, more than 230 years later. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الدور المتغير للمرأة في السياسة الأمريكية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.